I used to consider some things interruptions, but I just had an interruption, but I don't call it that, sitting there by June. And when Wayne was leading us in this beautiful song, it became an analogy to something that happened in my life about 20 years ago, and I feel I'm to share it, and I'm going to try. It won't be easy. But I left my sailboat in the sand about 20 years ago in this way. I'd been traveling in the States and Canada and Mexico, but I'd never gone abroad and left my husband. I wouldn't go overseas and leave him because he worried a lot, and he saw a plane fall once and everyone in it perished, and I never got him on a plane. As long as he lived, he refused to get on a plane. Our sons would try to get him to go, and Daddy, I'll buy you a ticket. Nope, son, if the trains go and I can't drive, I don't go. He never got on a plane. It frightened him so. It fell right out in front of where we lived. And so I got over the fright, but he didn't. I was in California, in La Mesa, California, in the home of can't think of their names. He's a famous doctor, and he got up at 5 o'clock every morning to pray, and his wife was a dear, and she was head of all of the Methodist women that were over the districts, and had called these head of the districts. What are they called in the Methodist Church? I ought to know. What? Well, anyway, these women were having a convention, and this friend of mine, and I can't remember her name, had asked me to come and speak to them, and I was a guest in their home. And I was also a guest in Whittier, in the home of Al and Ruth Umshide, and some of you know the Umshides, dear people of God. She works for Robert Schuller and has for years. And there was a young minister by the name of Tom Walker boarding there and rooming there and teaching school. He was not preaching that year, he was teaching school. I had never seen Tom Walker, and I was there visiting Al and Ruth, and I spoke in a Methodist church in Pasadena, one of those towns around there, and he went and played the piano. That's the first time I ever saw him. But we were both spending the night, he a boarder and I a guest, in the house of the Umshides. And we sat up quite late and talked, and this young man had a very sensitive soul. I knew that. And the Umshides had told me a little bit about him, too. So Tom excused himself about 10:30 and said, I think I'm going to retire. So Al and Ruth and I were still sitting up maybe half an hour later, and he came back in. And he said, Thelma, I am embarrassed, but I can't go to bed till I have prayer with you. I have to pray for you. And he said, I know you've been on the path a lot longer than I have, but I can't get peace until I pray for you tonight. So I said, well, don't apologize, Tom. I need all the prayer I can get. So we went into another room, and he and I sat there and shared till 2 a.m. And he laid his hands on my head and he prayed. And when he did, the Lord gave him a word of knowledge, it's called. Something he didn't know and couldn't know, but he spoke it right out to me. He said, Thelma, I see you going from the shore, and the shoreline has been cut, and you're going way, way out, out, out. You're going out into freedom. And I thought, what could that mean? I guess my mother's going home, because I felt more, well, I don't know, I can't explain that, but I thought it'd be my mother, because she was older. Although my husband had emphysema, he was still up. We'd take trips, and he'd go to town, and he was not bad, just had emphysema. And he said, I don't understand this. I said, I don't either, but I thank you. And we had a wonderful time of fellowship in there. I went on up to La Mesa, to this home I mentioned, and we had the meeting for the district women, and then she invited about 12 dear close friends of hers in for lunch. She told them not to tell the rest of the women. She said, I'm just real selfish. I just want this little group. And we had a fire in the fireplace, and she brought snacks on the coffee table. We didn't even go to the table. We had a few snacks, and we shared, and we prayed, and we worshiped, and we had a glorious sharing time. a prayer time. And in a little bit, I wish I could think of this woman's name. I can see her face so clearly. They lived on Candy Lane, I remember that. And she came over and said, Thelma, I want to pray for your husband. I thought, well, that's funny, that's strange. But I had had a letter from him the day before, and he was doing fine. And she said, I don't know your husband, but I feel impressed to pray for your husband. So she said, I'm going to put my hand on your head and pray by proxy for him. And she prayed. Neither of these people ever met my husband. And Al and Ruth never met him. So they always were not people who knew him. But this woman put her hand on my head and prayed for my husband. And then, when she prayed for him, she started praying for me. And she said almost word for word what Tom had said the week before when she finished her prayer. It was direction that I didn't understand. You know, God is so merciful to veil things from us when he does. And she said to me, your shoreline is going to be cut, and you're going to launch out into the deep, Thelma. You're going out into the deep. Well, it was a mystery to me. I thought, you know, I always felt kind of like my mother she pretty much felt like we were still her kids in our 60s, and she'd make the, you know, what do you call it? She's calling the plays. And so I thought, well, maybe my mother's going home. That was what really I thought. Bless her heart, she's there now. But I didn't understand what was happening that night, either night. One was a day experience, one was a night experience. And this was October. I went home, and I'd had the letter the previous day, my husband telling me that he was doing great, so I went back when it was due. And God is so good, so good. If this had happened while I was away, I would have had such remorse. 2 days after I got home, he had the worst attack he'd ever had. I had to rush him. My husband was with a railroad company as an inspector, and they had a railroad hospital 90 miles from Fort Worth, and I had to rush him to that hospital. And his breathing was so difficult, and I can't tell you what I went through that day, 2 days after I got home. I rushed him to that hospital, and they put him on that bird machine and treated him, and we stayed, I believe, 2 or 3 days. He got better. I took him home. And this never entered my mind what happened in those 2 homes. It never, I didn't remember it. I don't remember that it ever filtered back into my mind until sometime after my husband's death. But from this time in October, and I think it was about the middle of the month that this happened, from the time I got home, he began to go downhill. And I do praise God for sparing him while I was away and keeping him at the keel where he was when I left until I got back. Because I always went with his blessing. I never went anywhere without asking his permission, and he'd always say, go. And sometimes I'd think, I wish he'd say, don't go, stay here with me. But he never did. And I went. And so I was busy going back and forth. So we came home, and there was a doctor in town that saw him for the company, and I would take him down there. And he had, I don't know why men are so funny. Girls, aren't they strange? They don't want a woman to drive them. My husband told me one time I was a better driver than he was, but he wanted to be behind that wheel, and he wanted to do the driving and let me sit over there where a woman ought to sit. But I had to drive him. And he was having to use lots of things and not well at all. And it just began to increase and increase. And from then on, he was in and out of the hospital I don't know how many times. This was mid-October or a little after when he went in the first time. He was in 3 different hospitals, and 5 different doctors saw him and did things for him. And he became thinner and sicker. And there was a Solomon's Head of Christ in that Methodist hospital. That's a beautiful old hospital. And my husband's bed was facing that picture of Solomon's Head of Christ. My husband was not vocal about his feelings about God ever. He wasn't vocal about very many things. And but this was in his direct line of vision. And I would go and sit by his bed, and then I'd look at that, and I'd sit there by that bed and pray, and I would try to say, "Thy will be done in this situation as it is in heaven." And I'd get nearly to it, and then I'd say, "God, I can't do it. I can't say it. I can't say it." I'd pray for him, but I couldn't say, "Thy will be done." And so this went on until about a week before Christmas, when he was in very great need and very sick. We called our son from Corpus, and my son did, and he came and stayed a few days. And anyhow, on Christmas morning, all of the men in that unit where they took care of people that had to use the bird machine went home for Christmas, but my husband and we were the only ones in that great big department. And I sat there, and he began to perk up, and I never shaved anybody in my life, and he said he needed to shave. And I tried to shave him, and we laughed. He was so weak, but he laughed. He says, "Thelma, you're cutting my throat." And I got so excited because he was better. And I got some clean pajamas on him, and he was lucid. He had been unconscious some of the time. And my sister sent him a home-cooked Christmas dinner, and I sat there and fed it to him. And I thought, he's so much better. He's so much better. Around 2 o'clock, I guess, he began to, his diaphragm was swelling, and he couldn't breathe. And I called the nurse, and she ran, and they couldn't find our doctor, but they put him in intensive care about 4 o'clock, Christmas Day. And I could go in at 6 for, I think it's 5 minutes or 6 minutes, whatever they let you stay. And he was so much better, and they had tubes here and there, and they draining his lungs, and he was smiling, and his color, there was a little color in his face, his hands were warm, and he was in there with a group of other people, and I patted him, and he said, "I wish they'd get these tubes out of me." And I said, "But honey, they're draining that fluid from your lungs." Well, this is a lot of details, but I don't know what else to do but do what I felt sitting there I had to do tonight. And so I left him and waved at him and walked out. 2 hours later, I could see him again. So my daughter-in-law took me to the hospital, and she said, "Mom, I'll be right back. I'm going to the drugstore." And I walked up those 2 flights of stairs. I rather ran up those 2 flights of stairs where he was, and there were, I guess, 10 or 12 people waiting in line to get in, and I got in line. And a nurse saw me, and she went running just as hard as she could go down this way, and pretty soon my husband's doctor was standing beside me, and he said, "Ms. Lee, I want to talk to you." And he took me out of line, took me in his little room there, and he said to me, I'm by myself, so far as a human hand, "Ms. Lee, I don't know what happened, but your husband is dead." And I was so shocked. That's just a very mild word, but even though they're sick, you're never prepared for that. He was prepared to go, but I wasn't prepared for him to go. And so I couldn't believe my ears, and anyway, He told me, he said we wouldn't have had that happen where it happened for anything in the world. He was right beside one of our worst coronary patients. And the nurses tell us that nothing happened, he just died. So I'm sitting there with this doctor, and in a few minutes, the man from the funeral director, he came, and I can't tell you what that did to me. That was the most final thing that I think ever happened to me. The finality of it hit me. And I had asked God several years ago. I had a very real dream that my husband died, and that I just went to pieces. And after I had that dream, I said, God, I'm a Christian. I've got faith in you, and I try to go around helping other people. If this ever happens to me, don't let me act like that. Give me grace. And so I sat there, and I for a little bit, I got out of control, and then they called my son back, and the one from Corpus had just left the day before. And anyway, it was a beautiful service, and many things happened that you look back on. The plan of God, that will be 20 years, Christmas Day. And just that little while before he went away, I was given 2 words I was given some understanding, yet I didn't understand it. I was given a warning, like I suppose you would call it, an alert. And after he was gone, I suppose 3 months, I remembered what those 2 people had said to me, and I thought, that's what they were saying. God was letting me know that my life was going to undergo a change. And so I never had associated that song with my experience until a while ago. And it just rose in me, and I know it was the Spirit of God. If you've gone through this, or perhaps, you know, the mortality rate of the human race is 100%. And we think it's so remote. And it is from where a lot of you sit. But I began to see that I would never go beyond our borders, North America and Mexico, as long as my husband lived. I never dreamed in all of my wildest dreams of going to places in the world I've been. And I didn't start over there till I was 63. And it wasn't easy. As John says, it ain't easy. But I left my sailboat. My moorings were gone. Within 6 months, the home was sold. I sold the house. We'd been planning to move anyway and get farther away from business. It just kept, and they were in close to 3 hospitals, and the sirens went all night. And we were looking for a place, so I sold that house, had a backyard sale, and some more of me went. And I didn't tell God I was leaving my sailboat in the sand. And I didn't say you smiled and said, call my name. That didn't happen. But I know what it is to leave your boat in the sand, sailboat, and be just dependent, just utterly there to walk with him and stand by his side and begin a new life. I know that. I know that part of the story very well. And friends, he's never failed me. I've failed him many times, and I've gotten, and still occasionally, I hit a nosedive when I can't do anything but cry. I'm not crying for my husband, because I'd rather stay here alone than to have him, for him to have had to do it. And I know he's with God, and I know that he's all right, and that he's in the arms of Jesus. And so often I look up and say, thank you, Jesus, he's in your rest home. He's not around here in one of these. Amen. You're taking good care of him. And anyway, if you've left your sailboat, or you're if it happens to you, it may not be that. It may not be that. But he's never failed. And the things that he's taken me through and carried me through these years, I never would have believed in all my wildest dreams of going to Japan and the Philippines and some of those places. Never. I wasn't sick in the Philippines, where it was the most primitive place in one area in the Mindanao I've ever been in all my life, and many of you have heard me talk about it. It would have been hard for a 30-year-old woman there, with those lizards 12 and 14 inches long inside our walls, all over, and over the ceilings, and fall on my house coat. I had to shake one old fellow off one morning. And sit and fan flies off my foods with one hand and eat with the other. I can't tell you some things. I mean, it just was a real, real trial. But oh, the joy of working with people that know you've come with no ulterior motive, not to get them into your church. Vivian and I had to pay our own fare there. They couldn't give us 10 cents. It's such a joy. Now, I thank you for your honorarium here. That enables me to go to some of those third world countries. The work I do in the States, I put this into my travel fund. But they knew that we had come there on our own expense to share the love of God with them. And the love of those Filipino people, it was such a poor area. And then I was in Cebu, where this little church near the leprosarium, where they were just as poor, and feeding over 200 children there at this little church every day at noon. And the Methodist minister's wife was feeding about 300 in a school in that general area, and World Vision was feeding this one at the church and some other American group, and I forgot who they were. And I saw them, I ate with them, I hugged those arrested lepers, and they hugged me. And I didn't know what I was leaving my sailboat for. And I didn't need to know. It was best I didn't know. But God has been so merciful and so great and so mighty, and there's nothing my God cannot do. And I just was thinking of that allegory. My heart was following that. I left my sailboat in the sand, and I found, by his side, I found a new life. It wasn't exactly a new life. It was a deeper, way out, doing things that I never dreamed, out into the deep, as these two individuals had told me, that my life was going to be different, it was going to be richer, and that I hadn't seen anything yet, or words to that effect. It was a very encouraging thing, but a very mystifying thing those two times. God speaks to us in strange and mysterious ways, and he veils the future from us mercifully. Mercifully, he veils the future. But I really had planned to continue what I was talking about last night. I don't know whether I will have time or not, but I didn't get through last night. I quit. When I was talking about this Lord of Glory and this beautiful Psalm 24, the verses 7 through 10, I wanted to share with you that I read and discovered that this could have been used when they placed the Ark of the Covenant in the temple. It could have been sung, because it was sung in the temple as a song. The Psalms were. And that it was possible and maybe probable that they sang that psalm. I do not know. Also, it could have been fulfilled near and far and in between. There are near fulfillments and far fulfillments to Scripture sometimes. immediate and future fulfillment. And it could have been when Jesus went back to the Father, after he made the great oblation and gave himself for the sins of the world, and then went back and entered the courts of heaven, and maybe the angelic forces began to sing, "Open wide ye gates, let the King of glory come in." He came, he saw, he conquered, I guess you could say. He came, he died, and he conquered. He died, he conquered in dying. He came to die. And it could have been a chorus. This was, I don't know if it was Dr. Barclay or somebody, I read that, and I loved that thought, that it could have been used in the temple worship. It could have been used at referring to Christ when he went back to the Father after his resurrection, and it could refer to even that is to be fulfilled yet, when he comes and brings his bride back, brings his bride home to the Father's house. So I wanted to share those thoughts with you. I thought they were rich. It isn't just a psalm that's there. It is a very important psalm, and to the Jewish people, as I read this. And so in thinking about that, and to repeat a bit of what I said last night, he that stands at the door and knocks is royalty. If somebody knocks on my door or rings my bell, I've gotten to the place I say, "Who is it?" Because I don't open my door to just anybody. I had over $500 worth of checks stolen off of my where our mailbox is, and it's right there close to my door. One Saturday morning in broad open daylight. So I don't open my door until I say, "Who is it?" Well, that's what Jesus is waiting for us to say. Who is it? He's knocking at our door. He's knocking. His word is knocking at the door of our minds, that we can eat it and read it and devour it and become strengthened and become... there's wisdom in this book. Shakespeare said no matter how, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but with all the education in the world, if you didn't know the Bible, you were not educated. Your education was incomplete. So there is such wisdom stored. There's some chapters in Job that are the most majestic. 38 and 39 chapter of Job are the most majestic things. Beautiful, beauty, unbounded beauty in the scriptures. And I've told you that I think there's a lot of humor. I see a lot of funny things too, because it's full of stories about human nature. And we humans do such funny, strange things, don't we? Well, this kingdom, every king has a kingdom, or he's not a king in reality. And this king that asks for admittance into your heart and mind is the Lord of hosts, and he's co-creator of everything that's in this world, and he's my Lord, and I'm walking by his side, and you are too. And he's within us. He's within us to help us in instances when we have to leave our sailboat in the stand or whatever we're doing. It is something that you cannot define except you walk there, and maybe that's all right. But friends, you and I are the kingdom. The kingdom of God is made up of people just like you and me. How's the kingdom doing at your house and at my house? In Luke 22 and verse 29, Jesus said, "I appoint unto you a kingdom as my Father hath appointed unto me a kingdom." Now, I don't know. I didn't have time. I don't have a single one of my commentaries with me, and I couldn't search that out last night and this morning when I was looking for something. Somebody else here, John or somebody, Wayne, somebody, some minister might be able to, or somebody else. But he says, "I've appointed unto you a kingdom." That's you and me. He said, "As the Father appointed me a kingdom." And then he tells us repeatedly, "As the Father sent me, so have I sent you." We are the kingdom. The kingdom of God is made up of individuals. The kingdom of God is the reigning of God in the hearts of people. And so, How is the kingdom doing? The world sees us and we call ourselves Christians, and some of them look at us and say, maybe, I wonder what makes him tick. He had a blowout and lost a brand new tire, and this happened and that happened, and he kept his cool. I'd like to know that guy better. Or this woman's jam boiled over and filled her stove with smoke, and she lost all of her time and her sugar and her pears or whatever she's doing, and she didn't get mad and upset and cry. What makes her tick? The kingdom. The kingdom walk. You can't be your old self and be a good example in the showcase, and we're each a showcase for God's presence in the world. We're lifting up some picture of Jesus in our lives. How are we portraying this King of Glory in our individual lives? What does the world see in you and in me that would reflect the glory of the King that we say, he's our King and we're in his kingdom? Well, God should be welcomed continually into us. This King of Glory should be welcomed daily and hourly when our minds are clear to think in your moments. And I don't know when I've had such a wonderful year with God as I've had the past year. I have felt his nearness. I've felt so close to him that I wish he'd just take me on home with him. I wanted to go home. The birthday I had in '84, my family and lots of friends, I just had 2 birthday parties in all my life because my birthday's Christmas Day and my mother had 10 children. And who could have a birthday party on Christmas Day? And I couldn't understand that for a long time. But they were wishing me many returns of the day, and I'd say, don't say that. I don't want to live a long time. I've had a good life. I've already lived as much as I'm promised. I don't want to stay here and be dependent. I want to go home. At the memorial service, I was asked to do that. I think that was 85, 84 or something. And I didn't want to do that. I never had done it, and I never had a memorial service, and I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get up there and I know it's nice to remember people, but they're dead, and go list names. And you see, that's just the way I am. It's not that I want to forget the people. I didn't want to do that memorial service. I didn't know how. I thought, I'm not about to stand up there and have prayer for the dead. They're not dead, they're alive. And so I went to bed thinking, what in the world will I do? And I had to do that Monday morning. And this Sunday was real busy, and I didn't have time to think I didn't have time to get too nervous. But Sunday night I couldn't sleep, and I was rolling, and I said, God, give me something that's not, I don't want to talk about death. So they gave me a list of names to read. Well, I did do that. But the Lord has a sense of humor, and he came through, and I think he laughed with me. I really do. But I can't go to sleep if I know I've got to do something. Now, I can't go to sleep tonight if I know I've got to speak in the morning. But I'm not. John's going to speak in the morning. Don't worry. This is the last time you hear me for that. But anyway, this came to me while I was lying there rolling and saying, God, what in the world can I say? And I just heard, they just caught an earlier flight. And I chuckled. I thought, that's the greatest thing I ever thought. I didn't think of it. The greatest thing I ever heard. I got up out of bed and I jotted down, they just caught an earlier flight. We've all got our tickets in our hands. We've got our way paid. And you don't need a return. One-way ticket. And they may call your flight any time. And I had fun in a memorial service. I dutifully read those names, and that's all. And then I went into this, and it was happy, and I just got the biggest bang out of that. And now the Lord came through with that. That was His idea. That's His idea of death too. They just caught an earlier flight, and I've got my ticket in hand, and my one-way ticket. I won't have to pack another bag. What's God going to do with us when we get out there and there's no suitcases and nowhere to go, Wayne? Well, anyway, I said, when I got through, I said, now look, if my name's on this list next year, don't you grieve for me. I'll be having a ball, because I'm going on when that flight of mine's called, and I'll be having a ball. And that's the way we had the service. And so, this is the way I feel about going home. And I've already sent in my reservation right after the last camp the Lord has for me. I don't know when that'll be, but I don't plan to stay here and get old. I really don't. I'm learning many lessons, still in school. I think I'll share something with you that I shared in Kentucky that I think is funny tonight, but it sure wasn't funny that Sunday morning. When you leave your sailboat and you go with Jesus, some strange things happen, and you wonder sometimes if He is standing beside you. Where did He go? I've been in the United Church of Christ for about 30 years until the last 6 months. Now I'm dependent, so I go to the Baptist church with my children. So I was commissioned as a lay minister in that church, and that means I could do anything but pastor a church. So I never felt God called, at least He didn't ever call me. He may call some women to pastor. But when the pastor was gone, if I were in town, I usually had the service, and this happened to be communion service. Now this church I'm in is liturgical. It's very much like the Lutheran church. They're old churches. They're 200, I don't know, well, so was the Methodist church. Anyway, it's an old church. And most of our members had Swiss and German backgrounds, and they were staid people, and they liked the status quo, and nothing different. And I don't exactly fit into that pattern. I like variety, and I like surprises, and I really got one that Sunday morning. I got up and gave the talk, and there was one of my friends, a fine man, was the liturgist that Sunday, and communion was all ready. We have a small church. I mean small church. And so we just have 2 plates for bread and two trays of, we're smart. We put the wine on the outside and grape juice in the middle, so you can have your choice. And so everything was ready. I had the talk. I went to the altar and prayed over the bread and the tray of wine and grape juice, and I turned around. I have to wear a robe, and I'm all robed up, and some of my friends are sitting out in the audience that knew I was going to speak that day, a retired lawyer and his wife. And so I got that bread broken, half in 2, and put half in one of those lovely brass containers and half in the other. And Raleigh and I started to where the ushers were standing, 2 steps down there, to give the plates to the ushers. And you've already ahead of me, you're like, oh, I broke the bread first. I broke the bread when I was saying He broke the bread and blessed it, and etc. So it was broken in little pieces. And I don't know what happened. That robe was kind of long, and I missed that step. And that plate rolled down the aisle, way down the aisle. Bread went everywhere, blessed bread. But that's not the worst thing. I fell on my left foot. My poor feet had more things happen to them. And I couldn't get up. And I'm lying. I couldn't fall behind the organ or over there behind it. I had had to fall right in plain view of the whole congregation. And I'm lying on the floor in the middle of communion, and they were passing the bread. No, they weren't either. They weren't doing anything. It was just came to a stop, and I'm on the floor. And a fella came from the back, a young man, and says, "Thelma, you want to go to the hospital?" I said, "Oh, no, leave me alone. Don't touch me. Don't touch me." And the congregation's sitting there waiting. They brought a little folding chair out and finally got me up on that chair. And I was so embarrassed. I wanted the floor to just swallow me, anything to get me out of sight. And so they helped me, and I went up and broke the half of the loaf that was left into 2 pieces and broke it again. And somebody helped me to the steps that time. And so I sat down. Up until this time, this chair was sitting like this, and the audience is out here. Up until then, I had looked out at the audience. I couldn't face them. And I'm sitting there in that chair with my head down and hurting so bad that I wanted to cry for more reasons than one. And then they brought the trays back, and I took them, and I got the trays with the glasses, and the ushers took those, and I sat down again. I looked out at the audience, and I said, "Nothing like a fresh lesson in humility." I had spoken on humility. You know, I don't believe I'm a proud person. I don't have anything to be proud about. I love my Lord, and I adore Him, and I worship Him, and I'm fortunate to be His child. And I don't want to be proud. But I guess that was one thing. My pride was just wounded. A woman in the first place serving communion in that church was not kosher. And I fell flat in front of everybody. And so they had refreshments later over the fellowship. I went home and got that foot up. But now I thought this morning, Lord, I prayed that morning. I prayed. I know I had what you want me to talk about. Did you have to do that to me in front of all those people? I can't tell you. It's the most embarrassing moment. And by the way, I'll tell you what happened at Pennsylvania camp. I had shared that with, maybe I told this up there, I don't remember, but that Alex McCullough was the other speaker, and he is as bad as Wayne West. And I love them both to pieces. But Alex and I were in the Pennsylvania camp together. Oh, I know how it happened. We had fun night. Everybody was supposed to tell something funny or share something funny or put on a stunt of some kind. Well, I don't know how to put on stunts, so I thought of that ridiculous story. And it was real. It was for real, too real. So I thought, I'll just get up and tell that, because it's funny now. So I got up and told that, and I had already been invited by Alex to assist him in the communion. So I came back and sat down one seat between Alex and me. And I reached around that other person. I said, "Alex, you still want me to help you with the communion?" Enough things like that happen to me that make me wonder where God is sometimes. Where did He go? Everything was in order and everything was in control, and then all at once I'm left in an embarrassing situation like that. But you know, those people were so kind. The minister was out again. He was out for 3 weeks. They came the next Sunday to hear me speak. But I didn't have to serve communion. You don't know where you're going, but I'll tell you one thing. He is there, whether you understand it or not. And the greatest consolation I had was this lawyer that I thought, oh, dear goodness. And they were sitting out there watching me. And he said to his wife, and she told me about it. It was very encouraging. He said, "Well, I'll say this for Thelma. She maintained her dignity even on the floor." But I thank God I can laugh about it after it's over. At the time, I just nearly died. It nearly cruised. And I suppose the Lord is trying to teach me that life is, it's up and it's like the beat of music. It's up and it's down. Your hand goes up and then it comes down. And we want a smooth sailing level. We like the status quo, don't we? We don't like the ups and the downs. But oh, he is so kind and wonderful to us. God bless you. I think you were supposed to be out here at 9 o'clock, weren't you?
We're supposed to be out when you left. That's
Right?
We're just supposed to be out when you left.
No, are you talking to me in Spanish?
Ma'am?
Were you talking to me in Spanish?
No, I said, do you want to talk some more? We'll
Oh,
let you
no,
talk
I'm
some
through.
More. You want to?
I'm through. I promise you I'm through.
Watch that step there, Thelma. Wait, just a minute. Before Thelma sits down, I want to ask that all of the ministers would meet with Thelma and me right now in this room for 15 minutes. We have to plan the communion for tomorrow night.
Are there any steps to climb?
No steps. Well, Thelma, I do want to tell you that I heard about a similar situation that the choir at this one church was, they were going to put on the Messiah. And, yeah, can you hear me back there? A church was going to put on the Messiah. And the choir was going to file in down the main aisle of the church. And so everything, all the candles were lit, everything was perfectly beautiful. And the back doors opened and in came the choir. But now there was a large heating grate right in the middle of the aisle. And about the fourth lady had on spike heels. Well, she did pretty well until she got almost off that grate and one of her heels got hung in that grate. And rather than mess up the whole processional, she just stepped out of her shoe. Well, they were coming in 2 rows, and so there was a man right there, and he thought he would just help her by reaching down and taking her shoe to her, you know, and he was going to hide it. Well, when he picked up the shoe, the whole grate came with it. Well, there he was marching down the aisle to sing the Messiah with a grate in his hand.
You take the cake. I give you the...
But the worst tragedy happened when the person behind them did not notice and went right in the hole.
I'll tell you, God uses some strange in this kingdom walk. You meet all kinds. Isn't that nice? It's a diversity. They're not all like Wayne and me.
Thelma, we just will sit down.
I got to tell you one. When Wayne and I were in college, we were going to sing the Messiah. All of these jokes are about the singing. This one is. And this really happened. And the college choir went to a visiting church to sing Handel's Messiah. And I was the alto soloist, and the alto solo is, "He shall feed his flock like a shepherd and carry them in his bosom," you know. So I knew it. So I didn't take up my music. And I stood up. And the choir was sitting behind me, including Wayne. And I started to sing, and that's too high, I can't sing that high now. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. And my mind went blank. Well, he was going to feed the flock with oats and wheat and barley and corn and with some soybeans. And with some soybeans. I just made up the whole thing. What would you feed your flock? Needless to say, Wayne and the rest of the choir were in the floor. The other thing, that real embarrassing thing that happened was when do your children ever embarrass you? Well, I think I've told this to some of y'all, but we went to this church in Pennsylvania that this really happened. And we were invited there. We had never been there before. And the children were kind of little. It seemed like Moy was about 6 and Amy was about 11 or 12 or 13. And there was another girl with us. She was about 13. And we got there, and it was a real lively church. And the preacher said, Sister West, come on up here and sit on the front row with the children. And Brother West, come on up here to the platform with me. And so Brother West went on up there. And then the piano player came in. And the piano player had on a white suit, and it was a man, and his hair was all slicked back. And he looked like he had just played down at Snoopy's Pizza Parlor or something like that. And he went, now I got to tell this, but I got to be the piano player too, okay? So he went over to the piano, and he got his book out. I got to be the preacher and the piano player. Okay, so he got his book out, and he got ready, and the preacher said, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're just so happy to have you in our congregation tonight, and we want to get the service off to a rousing start. Get your hymn books, and we're going to start with a good, lively song, number 138. Then he turned around to the piano player, and he said, are you ready? And he said, I'm ready. Number 138. And he started. Wonderful singing, brothers and sisters. And now we're going to turn over to 267. This is a lively song for the Lord. And he said to the piano player, are you ready? And he said, I'm ready. 267. We just want to get quiet and just want to worship and just get quiet before the Lord and get reverent and in a real spirit of worship while we sing together number 108. And he said, are you ready? And he said, I'm ready. And they are going into hysterics. And so then the preacher said, tonight we're really honored to have special guests from North Carolina, and Brother and Sister West are going to come and sing for us. And as Wayne and I were walking up to get ready to sing, I said to him, I think we're going to bomb out. We don't know the song. But we got through the song, and Brother West got up to give us a word from the Lord, and he preached one of his good sermons. And then the preacher said, now I want you to get your hymn books and turn to you're getting ahead of me. Turn to 229, and we want to all come down to the altar and pray as we sing together, number 229. Just as I am, without one
Okay, we're going to sing, yes ma'am.